Hello, and welcome to Seeing Jesus with Paul Miller. I'm Liz Boberil, and I'm here with Paul and our colleague John Horry, who trains church leaders in the U.S. and overseas. The ministry behind this podcast, See Jesus, creates discipleship tools and trains people in how to use them. Our desire is to rekindle within the church the central passions of Christianity: a love for Jesus, a desire to imitate him, and real working communion with the Father. Today, we're beginning a new short mini-series of sorts on leadership. There's a number of things that over the years of working with Paul, John, and I and others have observed about Paul that have been surprising or not what we expected. Ways that Paul has really imaged Jesus, practiced what he preached, and some interesting fruits that emerge into the life of the community and in Paul's own life and practices. So we wanted to spend a couple episodes just sharing some of those gems with those of you who are listening. So, guys, I think I'll jump in first.
So, Liz, first, my question, were you surprised because your expectations were so low?
Well, I think I always work around communication leadership, and I've known a lot of great leaders, right? But I think there's nonetheless, even within that pool, there's been some things about working with you that I've been particularly struck by. So for me,
that was just a joke. You can edit that
That's
out.
Liz's nice way of saying yes.
Yes, while not making anyone else I've worked for feel terrible while listening.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked you that. I should have distracted that.
That's okay, Paul.
It sounded like you had a check in your spirit when you said it. Like there was this, oh, wait a minute, people could read this wrong. But anyway.
Okay. Yes.
Maybe. I'm sorry, Liz.
No. I'll have to see. I'll figure out if I need to do something. I'll listen to myself. All right. So, Paul, one of the first thres
Oh, by the way, I think creating a tension like that is really helpful because I really see. I made a joke and I should have. I should have shut up. But I think that kind of tension that is really. I think you got to keep working that. You know. Okay. You didn't have to say what the source of that was. You know.
That we were surprised, you mean?
Yeah, you were just surprised. Yeah, I think that's fine.
Right. You're right. So Paul, my first observation, I'm going to kick it off here, but when I learned that you tracked every week how many hours you spent writing and you reported that to multiple people, I was shocked because I find that, even for myself, I don't particularly like tracking my time. I'm used to thinking my time is valuable and I should spend it however I, sense the priorities in the moment. Like the salary world of full-time working professional. I mean, I'm not in the medical field, right? So my professional background tilts towards once you rise to a certain level, you don't track your hours, you just work, you give it your all and it's done. So can you tell the story behind why do you track your hours?
Let me see. There's a bunch of reasons why. So there's two things: why I track my hours and then why I let other people know what the hours are. One of the reasons I track my hours is I am a great believer in staring at failure and not be discouraged by it, but not what, like if this is something that's a clear calling. So I initially did it just for myself, partly so I wouldn't be fooled and, partly just for my own internal accountability that I would do it. And I was having such a struggle. And so I'd look at them every month and say, ugh, so it's hard. I should say the problem. So leading a mission that has about 25 staff and about 70 apprentices and trainers, and that God is blessing and growing, it just sucks the time. It's demanding the emails, the plans, all the things you have to do to care for people. So getting writing time is really hard to do. So I would just track it. And that forced me to keep looking at my life and how I go about doing my work. Do I need to be doing this? Do I need to be doing, you know what I mean? So it let me stare at failure and then I would pray every day that God would just give me the time. So I think some of it was just God answering my prayer to be able to focus more, and then the reason I started putting them out there on our metrics for See Jesus is because I needed prayer. I just needed help. I was struggling. So so people could see it. So it seemed to be just common sense to me. If this is something God was calling me to do, then I needed help doing it. So, and help comes by prayer. So,
yes. And I like the simple faithfulness of, I know people say about writing, like if you want to write, the thing to do is to write every day. Like if you want to write something, the thing you have to keep doing is get up and write. And, you can't sit down in a morning and write a whole book. Right. So I like, but for me, that encouraged me in faithfulness to the things that God's put on my heart to just faithfully put in the time. Counting the hours gives you something more objective than the subjective sense of, well, I tried today, so I don't know.
Yeah. Right. And in the business world, I think in goals world, they call it, I think they call it a leading indicator. So probably once a year, I'll read a business book. And so I read one on goal setting and it talked about how to focus on a leading indicator 5 years. And so I sat and thought, okay, what's if I measure, I'm going to write a book this year, so that's my goal. What drives that more than anything is volume of hours. So if I can that's my leading indicator. So it's a humility to slow down, to get accountability from others, to get help. I was talking to a friend of mine. I know I'm going off here a little bit, who taught in urban schools this last week, and the kids, she said, were so not used to asking for help. Because it sounds like she would go over it with them like a drum beat, and it kept them from learning because they would isolate themselves because I should have pursued it more, but I'm almost positive that they would see that as weakness, because that's how I'm putting out myself. So you're opening yourself up to something's not right in my world. I need help. Anyway, I'll stop.
Yep.
I think two things that kind of strike me is that from the very get-go, you actually framed it not in terms of self-discipline and managing time. You said it was a daily face-to-face with my failure. And when you frame it that way, then you're talking about helplessness, the need for help, the need to pray, the need for others, rather than, I just need to manage my time better. I need to be more self-disciplined. And then I think the second thing is that because it's not framed that way, then you're not only asking help from God, but you're asking help from people. There's accountability,
right,
in a sense.
Right.
And
right.
So now you're operating as a writer who's not only wanting to grow in self-discipline, but you're a writer who's asking for help from the Lord and putting yourself in some senses, you're a man who has authority, who's under authority.
Right.
And
right.
I think when you put that all together, it doesn't mean you don't have self-discipline or you're striving for that in some senses. I think it just reframes everything.
Yeah. 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 That makes me think another area where I submit that really helps me is, and it comes out of awareness of my that on my own, by myself, I'm dangerous. And I think that's true of anybody.
Yeah.
And that gets accelerated with leaders is in using an editor who just chews up my writing and spits it out. I mean, I went catatonic after my editor, and she and I have done 4 books together. and she's an incredible editor. And Liz Haney is her name, and we met for the first time maybe 4 or 5 years ago, but we always worked by email and phone. But I need someone outside of me who can critique me. I get too close to my own work. And I know that. And I just know I need someone who can be, probably the simplest way to say, a proxy for the reader. Mm-hmm. So I'm opening myself up for, it's just something how, like it's just that I'm not a, no man, no person's an island, that if I'm going to model Christ, and plus then I model Christ and see Jesus as being weak and needing help. So because everybody gets stuck on their stuff. And what happens is the shame, you've heard us talk about the shame boasting slide, mm-hmm. The failure boasting. Yeah, the failure boasting slide. I just renamed it. And so when you hit problems on a problem, you're going down that slide. And the idea, so what people tend to do, the way they hide that in work, is they go on to something else. They change the subject, or you know what I mean? So to concentrate on where something's not working is a dying, because mm-hmm. no one likes to stare at failure. And but I find that kind of dying out of that produces, the Spirit's life.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's a dying in facing your failure. There's a dying not only in inviting feedback, or in your case, an editor, but it's a whole nother thing to receive it. So a lot of, most writers have an editor, but I remember, I don't know if you remember this, Paul, like maybe 4 years ago, we were in Portland and we had a lunch with your editor.
Right.
I think we were over Thai food. And I remember.
John remembers the food.
I remember the food. It wasn't very good. That's why I remember.
Oh, that is so funny, John. God.
Yeah.
That's just like my sons would be that way too. They would, and I'm like, I vaguely remember the restaurant.
Yeah. Well, I remember the food, and I also remember the general interaction between you and Liz as I sat eating bad Thai food, as I was listening, was that you guys had a good working relationship in the sense that she was not only able to be honest with you as an editor, but you welcomed it, and you heard it, and you received it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think there was a pattern of that, so that as she was speaking to you, she knew that she not only had the invitation to do so, but there was a trust in that had been established over time, knowing that you not only wanted it but received it.
Yeah. And I that trust takes time, but again, there's a dying of opening and she spends about 120 hours on every book of mine. And I keep thinking that I've risen to this new level. I'm at a higher base camp on
Everest
on the Everest of writers, and that I won't need Liz anymore. But every time she says, "Who's your audience, Paul?" Oh, be quiet. And so she helps me to be in touch with the reader and not get lost in my own ideas, mm-hmm. and to realize that I'm out here to help the church. I'm not out here to become a writer. So I love I was at an artist symposium where they had a musician, it was a musician, an artist, and me. I was the writer. And I said, I might not be the best person for these, because I feel like a much more of a medieval craftsman doing a medieval cathedral. We don't know who they were, because for me, it's the art has a function, mm-hmm. it's doing something. So so as the artist, I am content to disappear. And the architects that created those Gothic cathedrals are just amazing, They take you to heaven, and everything I do has a way of me disappearing in it. Mm-hmm. And seeing Jesus and seeing me don't fit in the same room.
Yes. Paul, that makes me think about something I remember being struck by early on in my work with See Jesus. I was working on a story about our Bible studies and sort of why you've written them the way you have. And I remember you talking about the famous John the Baptist passage about he must increase and I must decrease, and this sort of visceral moment in your own life of leading studies that I feel like has indeed, like, really does shape that. Like, okay, like just what you said.
It was in my Jesus sabbatical in 91. It was like, in the late winter. And I remember reading. So I was really trying to read the Gospels as critique them, like evaluate them. And I just remember being physically sick at the thought of disappearing. Mm-hmm. And now that's how the kingdom works,
Mm-hmm.
So
yes. Yeah, that's what I remember was that that is in a lot of these words that Jesus, or in that case John the Baptist, that like we see them needle pointed and embroidered, right? They're nice art, but I appreciate that that's a reading that's like, oh, this is actually like a sock to the stomach of anyone who's ever really been loved by an audience, because that's so intoxicating, right?
Yeah. So I love doing the interactive seminars. All our seminars are interactive, and our curricula is the studies that we write are interactive, but we draw people out, and people like if I've done a Person of Jesus seminar, people don't come up to me afterwards and say, that was a wonderful seminar. They come up to me and say, I was thinking this about Jesus, and I never thought, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That they're, and the same in our prayer seminars, they're thinking about where we took them. Mm-hmm. That's what they're thinking about. They're not thinking that was a great sermon. They're thinking about the content of it. Yeah. It's probably the simplest way to say it. Yeah. So when that happens, it works.
Yeah.
I think one of the ways that it shows itself in your leadership, Paul, is that as you have crafted these tools, whether it be a study or a seminar, and then we take that tool, we've been equipped in it, and as staff, we may go out and utilize the tool. And then there is a certain amount of freedom to make it our own, that eventually people think, which always makes me nervous, that I designed the tool. And in even some places in some foreign countries, sometimes they mistakenly think I wrote the book or the books that you wrote.
Have you signed any of them, John? I would definitely. Get yourself a little sticker and put it right over.
I have,
Paul. He's been gone for a while.
Well, your picture is on some of the backs of the books, and I said, I'm not the author of the book, and so sometimes they said, no, we get that, but we want you to sign it because we met you,
right?
And so great. I remember when I was sharing that with you, you were just laughing. I know some authors would be offended by that, or and so I went ahead and signed my name in the book, and it was your response. I think. I knew you would find it hilarious. At the same time, I think you are always telling me, go ahead and use this, or go ahead and try this out, or go ahead and I said, well, I want to make sure that they know this is something you designed. You said, I don't care about that. And I said, but I do, because people can mistakenly think that I've just completely plagiarized you. And so that's to the extent where your willingness to recede into the backdrop makes me nervous in some ways. But it's also teaching me how to do the same.
Right.
So that eventually people don't only not remember Paul Miller, they don't remember John, and they eventually only remember Jesus.
Right. Yeah. I like to think of it as there are these chains there's these chains of equipping, like in 2 Timothy 2. Is that when Paul says, go find teachable men, but obviously Paul means people, teachable people that will be able to teach others. And that whole process is where it fits exactly what he says in Ephesians 4 about equipping the church. That's what the role of the pastors are. So it's actually a different vision of the church. So at the center of the church is it is as important as this is, the pastor and the sermon, but all of that, with the real important things are the guys out on the front lines. So it's the people working in IT and the hairstylist and the moms who are friends with their neighbors. And that's where the cutting edge of the church is. And so that would say sort of be the evangelism cutting edge, but also the heart cutting edge. Like you're equipping people to thrive within not only their own the church community, but their own little communities and their families. Like you're equipping them so that over Thanksgiving, when they're with the awkward, cranky relative, that they can reflect Christ. So that process is, and also in equipping people to train like we do in our workshops where they can lead Bible studies on their own. That means anytime you equip people, you disappear because you're taking time away from being in front of people, or you're giving other people space to preach in your church or something like that. You're disappearing so that other people can come up. And you can't equip the church if you are the center. And one of the things that, some churches have been shell shocked by the pandemic because everything is built around Sunday morning. And if you've not created a strong discipleship structure in your church, and I think that's more important than small groups, I think it's far more important. If you've not created I'd let your small groups function as part of that discipling structure. And if you're not doing that, then you're not touching, you're not equipping, you're not deepening people. So if people are really excited about Jesus and in the Word and teaching others the Word, that when Sunday morning stops, they just adjust their direction. You know what I mean? They don't. It's like, and of course, it's not. We're all on Zoom or whatever. But you just, I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think by necessity, given this season, it's shown potential weaknesses within the church. At least we're talking about the Western or the American church. And it's not a bad thing in terms of really being able to see an unleashing, a giving away of self, a giving away of ministry, so that what you just described happens. And if it really is solely dependent upon one particular person or a particular event on a Sunday, as important as those things may be, then not only practically speaking is the weakness of the structure exposed, but obviously it can become about one person or one event rather than what we've just described in terms of a body of people who, as they're giving their life away, are recessing back, and people are seeing Christ in and through them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Here's another way to describe what I'm talking about. The church looks a little bit like, let me use a military example, where you've got a general and a colonel and a lieutenant colonels, and then lots of privates. And I'm thinking, where's the middleman? You know what I mean? Where are your master sergeants and your sergeants and where are your non-commissioned officers? Liz gets tired of my military. I love
Liz
military.
Is loving this. Liz is loving this illustration.
I'm just really
Liz. Liz, you've got to give me your example. But there's no what's driving this is that like the middle meat is not here. Here, let me give you an example from a pretty well-known author that I won't mention his name, from about 30 years ago. Divided the church into VIPs, very very important people, VNPs, very nice people, and VDPs, very draining people. And basically your management strategy was to avoid, try to box in the VDPs and not get drained by the very nice people and focus on the VIPs. But it just misses. It's kind of like a management model, I guess. It's just not like in those. I'm actually pretty interested in the VNPs and the VDPs because the VNPs are that's where I need to get those are where are all these unseen people that have yet to develop. Some of them have it. There's some surprising, amazing, gifted people that have been overlooked. And go ahead, Liz.
I think the opportunity of the pandemic, right, is that where is the life of the church if Sunday gets, like if it's the shell game, right? Like if the shell's on top of Sunday, like how do you see the life of the church? Where is that? And you need it to be in more than the VIPs. Yes. It's the ordinary people who bring the church to life.
Right. And I'm not knocking the importance of the VIPs, but that illustration, John, that you shared with me from the missiologist really is appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, Alan Hirsch is a well-known Australian missiologist, and he, in his book Forgotten Ways, and then in multiple podcasts recently, was just talking about how the way he learned how to play chess by a chess master was put your queen out first, and she will get taken quickly, but then you will learn how to play with the rest of the pieces. So when the queen is put back on the board, then you really know how to play chess. And so he was talking about in the Western church, generally speaking, the queen is the Sunday morning experience in the sermon. And in some senses, as that has been taken off the board during this pandemic season, we are all being forced to learn how to play with the other pieces that are equally valuable within the church's ministry. And interestingly, as you're talking, many of the other pieces, if we call them ministries, involve a lot of the people that you just talked about in the VNP and the VDP category.
Right.
So a lot of the VIPs end up kind of in the queen ministry for a variety of reasons. And when you take at least the influence, or at least the just the emphasis off of that by necessity, then all of a sudden, sometimes, some churches are rising up in wonderful ways, and the people are rising up, and other churches are just floundering and not knowing what to do still.
Yeah. I think just one thing to add on there, I think too, that the not having the Sunday morning the way it has traditionally been also, in a certain sense, changes the job description of VIPs who maybe got too busy. There's a lot of work just to take care of the queen. She can have a really big schedule just day to day, and so it also reframes what's the work. It's a helpful disruption in some ways, where we've gotten pretty preoccupied with the queen.
Yeah. So, and we're not knocking the queen at all.
Right.
Liz, do you like the chess better than the military example?
I just am better at, royalty is more my sphere. John, Paul, side note here, we're at 30 minutes. We had some other stuff here. With taking criticism, John, you had a story about your APL seminar when Paul came out to meet you. That could have fit with up there. We could skip it now. We haven't talked about reviewing financial statements or counting sheep, kind of that granular leadership work.
I actually think we got 3 episodes, at least 2 episodes here. My temptation would be, if we're at 30 minutes, to wrap this up a little bit, and then go on to do another one, because we didn't. A lot of, like, the way
in Sam the Garden.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the garden.
There's a lot more. Okay.
And then we could hold off on the community in step with the Spirit till the third one. I do think we have 3.
I think that's good. 3 is always a good thing. I think we could wrap it up here because we kind of wrapped nicely.
Yeah.
So
why don't you wrap it, Liz?
Okay, I'll do that. Oh, to find. I have 1,000 little stick. Here it is. Okay. All right, that brings us to a close for today's episode. If you'd like to receive show notes each time a new episode is posted, you can sign up at cjesus.net/podcast. We always welcome your questions and feedback at podcast@cjesus.net. Thanks for listening. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording. We'll start a new one for the next.